Hi, can you hear me now? I suppose can you hear me, Clarissa? Can you just confirm if Great, perfect. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Thank you to Clarissa and the team at TFO for inviting me to this, and hopefully this gives you a better idea of what fair trade looks like in Canada. So I'll run you a little bit through what fair trade certification is and the fair trade market in Canada. I won't take too much time, so we have a lot of time for questions and discussions afterwards. So I'm just going to see how I scroll down on this. Okay. So within fair trade around the world, we work in over 73 countries. We work in the global south, in developing countries, or in countries that are eligible for overseas development assistance. And we work by now with more than 1.6 million farmers and workers across these countries. And it's a partnership between southern countries and countries around the world, and building different markets that are in a better trading partnership. We by now have over 35,000 fair trade products that are available around the world. In Canada, we're talking about 7,000 different fair trade products. We are obviously more known for some key categories such as coffee, chocolate, sugar, tea, bananas, but we also work with fair trade gold, with fair trade cotton, wine, and everything that you can make as a result. So if we work with fair trade coconuts, then that could end up in cosmetics or juices or shakes or creams. Same for cotton, which might end up in garments, and we also work with fair trade textiles that might not be cotton-based. So fair trade, in a nutshell, is about a different way of doing trade. It has basic components behind it on better pricing, decent working conditions, fair terms of trade for farmers. I'm going to try to see if I can make this slightly smaller so we have the whole. Yeah, it's a bit better. And it's an alternative approach that's based on partnerships. So we build partnerships along the supply chains. We know that supply chains can be tricky, and if you build a strong human chain around it where the humans across the whole chain work better in a partnership, then you can really have something sustainable that changes the terms. So we work around sustainable farming, environmental protection, transparency, and safe social conditions. Our standards for certification are different along the chain. So we certify producers, farmers. For example, it could be or farms. It could be a cooperative of smallholders. It could also be a plantation where they hire workers. And then we also certify along the way the traders. So if you are an exporter, then we certify the exporter. And then we certify the importers in Canada and anyone who transforms the product as well, so that we keep the transparency of the whole chain. At the producer level, or at the farm level, or the mine, or the factory level, what we look at is, you see some examples here of what we do. Obviously, we can send links to more of those documents, but it has three key pillars around the social, sustainability, development goals, economic as well. So in social, we're talking about democratic decision making, for example, in a co-op, protection around child labor, forced labor, safe working conditions, non-discrimination. And the economic part of our standards, I don't know why it seems to be at least on my screen. Okay. We're talking about protection through basic minimum prices that we ensure that producers can receive based on the cost of sustainable production. So these are floor prices, if you want, that protect you against market price fluctuations. When the market prices go higher than those minimum prices, then producers are guaranteed the market price, but if the market price crashes, then it acts as a guarantee or as a floor. Then there's a fair trade premium that is also received on top of that by producers that they can decide on democratically and what they do with this amount of money. We look at long-term contracts. We actually audit what the contracts look like so that it's beneficial for exporters and producers in the South. And we always have the option of pre-financing the contracts. And on the environmental side, I won't go into all the details, but we look at waste and water management, we look at soil, at GMO, we look at environmental protection of the community around. And all GMOs are banned within fair trade. And we run surveys across over 26 countries in all across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, US and Canada, and globally, fair trade is still the most recognized and trusted ethical label. We work with 3 producer networks, one in Latin America and the Caribbean, one in Africa and Middle East, and Asia Pacific. And those networks of producers have big field staff teams that support producers and exporters in the South to become certified, to work on some of the opportunities that they're trying to build and build on their capacity, whether it's financially or on the field or in agricultural practices. And then we have offices in multiple countries, such as us in Fair Trade Canada. So we have a small team here based in Ottawa. And our work is to promote fair trade within Canada with consumers, but also with businesses. The whole supply chain, just to give you an idea of how the certification functions, we work with, I don't know why I might be raising as I go. Okay, I'll stop doing that. So the producers or producer organization and the trader, so the first trader, which would be the exporter or the buyer at origin, are audited by Flowcert, which is a company that we own. We're a nonprofit and we own Flowcert. That's an independent third-party certifier that does the certification from those first parts. In Canada, we then start the auditing from the moment the products enter in Canada. So we would be the ones importing a coffee importer, for example, or a banana importer, and we would look at their books to make sure that what they're selling as fair trade was actually sourced through fair trade farms. We ensure that the contracts were signed properly, that the proper prices were paid, and that a trading partnership was in place. Then we do the same thing with the manufacturer. So if someone in Canada makes banana ice cream with the fair trade bananas, then we would also look at what they're doing and audit that part. And we partner with distribution, but we don't audit them. So we would not be auditing, for example, supermarkets, but we work with them and partner in terms of promotion. We are part of ICEO, which is the Alliance for Sustainable and Ethical Standard Setting that many certifiers, such as Rainforest, is always also a member of. And this is just to give you a context of whether some of the main benefits for farmers and workers that we see in the Global South. One is the stability of prices, so ensuring that there's a more stable price, a more long-term partnering within the supply chain. The fair trade premium, which is in bananas, for example, it's at $1 per 18 kg buck. So it's an additional payment of money on top of the price received for the goods that the farmers or the workers have in a democratic way to decide what they will invest it in. So depending on the region and the needs, it gets invested in very different ways. Sometimes it's in productivity on the farm. A lot of times it's also around health, and sometimes it's on the schools or whatever they see fit. A lot of times it's also about increasing the capacity to mitigate climate change. We've seen more and more of those types of programs. As an organization, we are owned by the producers and farmers within our system. So 50% of the ownership is through the producers that are certified, and the other 50% is through the different marketing organizations. So we as Fair Trade Canada, for example, are one member of the Fair Trade International system. And the idea is through the whole chain to really empower farmers and workers to take a better ownership over their life and be able to use farming and trade as a way to get to a more decent living condition. A bit of just market analysis from Canada. We run every 2 years a large GlobeScan survey across the country to understand if people in Canada understand what fair trade is, or if they look for certifications, if they look for sustainable labels. What we know is that 8 out of 10 Canadians who have seen the fair trade mark believe it has a positive impact on their perception of that brand. So, and the percentage that say it has a very positive impact is growing really rapidly. So what that means is people that normally typically buy a brand of a product, once they start seeing it with the fair trade mark on it, they trust that brand even more, and it has a very positive relationship with how they see that brand. There's a really high trust level of the fair trade mark in Canada, and we've seen a lot of growth in total sales. So we're now reaching about $400 million in retail sales in Canadian dollars. And those sales, for us, the more interesting part is to have been able to generate in Canada about $4.2 million in fair trade premium across the world from those sales. What we also know, and that might come up in some of the discussions later, but what we also know from that research is that Canadian consumers buy fair trade products because they are, on one side, they feel it's a product that reflects their values, and it's the product they're proud to be seen with. It's also more and more associated with higher quality products. So what we do in Canada and the way we support the sales of fair trade certified goods is that we work on increasing the demand of fair trade products, both by raising awareness with consumers. So we run programs across Canada with schools, with towns, with campuses, with workplaces, faith groups, where, for example, a school can, or campus or a university can become designated as fair trade if all their coffee, their sugar, their tea, and at least a chocolate bar or bananas or at least one other product is certified as fair trade and sold as fair trade on campus. They run a lot of events. We have a very active campus week in September where students try to compete against each other and do a lot of awareness raising on campus. And it has built a large tie into food service companies, so Aramark, Chartwell, Sodexo, on making sure that fair trade products are available. Same with a lot of the other programs. We also run a large retail program working with retailers across the country for them to understand what sustainability looks like and what that means. We're in the middle of Fair Trade Month right now, so Fair Trade Month is a promotion every year where we really try to educate consumers more about what fair trade is. So that's both on media, social media, online, and physical campaigns, but with retailers across the country. So we work with over, this year, about close to 2,000 retailers across the country are participating in doing either flyers, promotions in stores, working with different fair trade companies to do end-of-cap displays, like what you see in the photo there. And we train a lot of staff within retailers as well for them to understand what it means, and we partner with different companies. We also obviously audit for the use of the mark on the market and ensure that it doesn't get used by products or brands that are actually not certified as fair trade. So that's what we do. I'm looking forward to your questions in the discussion.
I can hear you, but Alina cannot hear you. I don't know what happened. This is at the back, the presentation is at the...
Well, I think I'm going to go ahead. I think most of you can
Yes.
hear me, hopefully. Okay, excellent. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Jake DeVignan. I am calling in from Vermont, so about 45 minutes south of the Canadian border. I'll actually be in Montreal tomorrow, so it's good to speak with all of you. I've been at the Rainforest Alliance, as Claricia mentioned, for 10 years. My first 7 years, I was a chain of custody auditor, and my last 3 years, I've been on our markets transformation team. And the role of our team is to work with businesses, large and small-scale buyers alike, interested in sourcing certified supply chains, whether that's coffee, cocoa, tea, bananas, excuse me, palm oil, various other fruits, etc. So I'm going to give a short overview of what we do at Rainforest Alliance, and then hopefully you guys will have questions for Julie and I once we get through. All right, so we are a 31-year-old nonprofit founded in the late 80s in New York City. Now we have offices in, I think, 15 countries. We're about 500 staff globally. And our mission is to conserve biodiversity and also ensure sustainable livelihoods. And we try to do this by transforming land use practices with producers, business practices with buyers, and then influencing consumer behavior. Similar to what Julie said, we want them to notice the certified seal on packaging, understand what that means, and be more motivated to make a sustainable purchase. So that's what we're working towards. We work globally, and we're pretty passionate about our work. Some interesting news. Some of you may have heard of the European-based NGO UTS, based in Amsterdam. They do very similar work to both Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade, certainly important differences as well. And as of January 9th, 2018, the Rainforest Alliance and UTS officially merged. We are now one organization operating under the name and brand of Rainforest Alliance, with dual headquarters in New York City and Amsterdam. So very busy and exciting times here at Rainforest Alliance, certainly expanding our operating budget and our number of staff both in offices and the field. We're also in the middle of our new strategic planning, which is a super exciting time, as well as a farm standard revision. So things are super busy here at the organization as we've pretty much doubled in size overnight. But I think it's a really great time and a really great opportunity for the work that we're doing globally. So I wanted to share that with you guys as well. And you can see in this slide the UTS logo. Perhaps that might spark some more familiarity, much more recognizable in the European market. So where do we work? The Rainforest Alliance works in the entire supply chain. We're happy to work with organizations from start to finish or jump in where it seems most suitable. So we work at farm level through both forestry certification and agriculture certification, working with producers in over 70 countries. And then we also work within supply chains with importers, exporters, primary manufacturers, secondary manufacturers, all the way up to retailers and brands. So we work on things like traceability and chain of custody compliance, trademark and brand management, corporate advisory, supply chain analysis, risk reduction services. And the point of this is that we're happy to work with an organization at any point in their supply chain where they think they might need the most assistance or they have the most questions. So we work in a lot of sectors. We have over 110 certified crops. Our standard is a farm standard, not a crop standard, which means because it can certify the entire farm, if a producer has been diversifying their farm and they grow multiple commodities, assuming he passes his audit, all of those commodities would be Rainforest Alliance certified. So you can see we work in over 3.5 million hectares, and this is all not taking into account the UTS figures, so these are all substantially larger now. And I wanted to highlight our priority areas. We focus in many commodities, but these top ones in front of you are where we spend the majority of our time. So tea, cocoa, and coffee, certainly. Bananas. Produce is more general of a term, I realize. I would say there it's pineapple, mango, and grapes. We're a large certifier and supplier of flowers for the North American buyers market and the Central and South American producing markets. We work in spices, palm oil, newly very involved in rubber, and we've always been a big participator and supporter of the Forest Stewardship Council's work in certified forestry. So I'm going to leave it there. I wanted to be short and sweet, open it up for questions for both Julie and myself. So thanks a lot for the time, and certainly after this, if you have interest in speaking further or have more questions, Clarissa, you can certainly share my contact info with people if there's interest. Thanks, gang. I think you're muted, Clarissa. Julie. Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. You can go first on the next one. We'll swap. So I would say a giant opportunity for exporters, really anyone lower down in the supply chain, are the new commitments or the increasingly large commitments that retailers are making to sourcing things as certified. I could probably list almost a dozen large-scale retailers that are making commitments like sourcing all of their cocoa as certified by 2020.
Do you want to go ahead
And
first?
generally speaking, that would include Rainforest Alliance, that would include Fair Trade, and probably organic as well. So these retailers aren't committing to one type of certification, which is probably smart on their part for diversification, but they are saying that if they're going to be buying a certain commodity, we'll use cocoa as the example, they want it all to be coming to them by 2020 or 2025 is also common. So that means that they're going to have to source that large commodity through really 3 certification programs. So I see a lot of potential there as these retail purchasers and buyers become increasingly aware of supply chain risk and they work hard to mitigate that risk. I think certification is viewed as a positive type of mitigation for all supply chains. Julie would love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, definitely. I would echo that. I would say also that the big commitments by brands and retailers to sustainable sourcing have started with the major commodities, so cocoa, coffee, a little bit around bananas in some countries, not at all, sugar. But we're seeing now that have a ripple effect of people that start to consume or start to buy as sustainably certified, and then say, okay, well, if I'm buying my cocoa or my coffee as fair trade or rainforest, why not my pineapples, my avocados, and a few other things too. So it definitely starts to open a lot more of that. I would say there's one of the things that's definitely a benefit as an exporter is that when you enter a certified supply chain, you typically start to interact with other types of importers or importers that are willing to commit to you for a much longer time. So what we see is longer trading partnerships. So it's not necessarily just someone who's like, okay, I'll buy 2 tons from you this year and they disappear. It's people who over time want to understand who are you buying from in the country, you're exporting on behalf of who. So they'll, don't expect easy people. They'll ask tons of questions, but at the same time you can then really build a trust, long-based relationship, which is for any business I think really key in terms of knowing, that you'll be able to sell next year and to who and for what price. It also allows. We used to say it's like access to a niche market, and the good thing is that it's a premium market, but the niche is expanding. So the niche is starting to become mainstream.
So it's not being demanded,
it used to be just a few. There is, in certain
retailers.
commodities, there's a lot, the same competition you have now in the conventional market might be the same under fair trade or rainforest certified. There's by now many producers in coffee or bananas that are certified. So it's no longer a way for you to compete, but it's a way to get sometimes even get into the quota of an importer. But it's definitely something that's becoming more and more mainstream. Yeah. Yeah, there's a big part that's consumer demand and consumer expectation. In certain categories, consumers just expect that it should be good. There's been also, obviously, over the last couple of years or 5 to 10 years, exposures by different documentaries or different news stories and items that have made a lot of consumers in North America a lot more aware of conditions of what's happening in their cotton supply chain, in a gold mine or on a coffee farm, that has helped create larger awareness and curiosity for what's behind the products they're buying. So yeah, the retailers, on one side it's pushed by consumer demand, but on the other side it's also pushed by, I would say, just a different way of doing business. I don't know, Jake, your experience. What we see here is that in Canada, retailers in terms of sustainability are probably about 10 years, if not 20 years behind the Europeans in terms of sustainability within their practices, but they're playing catch up. So I don't know if you can still hear me. For some reason, my computer. Oh. Yes, they're playing catch up of, catching up and understanding what it is. They now have sustainability teams within most of the retailers. They're still small
So
and they're
I
nowhere
guess
as
it would be the same for
robust
you,
as
Jake,
some
in terms of,
sustainability teams
especially from the
that work
European
with, the likes of
side,
Tesco,
because we've
Sainsbury,
had, we've
Co-op
seen
or
in
Lidl in
the
Europe,
Canadian
but the
grocer
North
a
American
number of
retailers are
European chains
definitely
entering
understanding more
the
what that means
U.S.
and
market, for
understanding more
example,
that it's also a win
Aldi
for them. So
and
not just in
some
terms of
others.
sales, but
So
that they
Lidl.
have a more
yes,
stable supply chain, they
have they
understand more their
Yeah, I would
risks,
agree with
they're less
Julie. I
exposed
think
to
Europe is certainly maybe 10
potential
years
human
ahead of
rights
us as
risk
being
allegations
kind
within
to the
their
North
supply
American
chain.
market, but the influence is huge. And then there's the global companies with such a big reach, like Walmart with their Asda partnership and that group,
yeah.
that I really see it spilling over. And I'm hopeful. I tend to be optimistic, but I'm hopeful that the growth in the retail market in North America over the next 5 years will be larger than that in Europe. But I do think, like you mentioned, that folks like Aldi, Lidl, the merger with Ahold Delhaize, those are all going to have dramatic impacts on the North American retail market because of that European influence. And then going back to Julie's comment about consumers, yeah, I mean, spot on. I just think we have a much more educated consumer base. Certainly retailers are paying more and more attention to millennials because of their purchasing power and influence. And I think that's a group that wants to understand what they're buying, where it's coming from, and are being a little bit more selective with their purchasing.
Thank you very much for your response on this question. The other question I have here, um, you have both organizations work in countries that TFO Canada serves, and I wanted to ask, what have you observed as challenges for small and medium enterprises, exporters, farm owners to access and use certification as a market access tool? Oh, it's Julie's turn to go.
Sure. Yeah, it really depends on the type of, first on the country, on the commodity, on the product that they're producing. What we see as a challenge first, and I would suspect that that's the same for any sort of certification, whether it's organic or even food safety standards, that there's almost, it feels like a limited threshold of size. For a very, very small, 2 people, tiny company to try to go on the road of certification might be a lot. The cost might not make sense if you're not selling a certain amount. So there's definitely, I used to be based in St. Lucia, so it's been interesting to see some of the question marks from St. Lucia. We had some challenges sometimes when really, really small companies, selling 2 cases of jam, glasses of like jars per year. We're like, well, maybe it's a different model for you. Maybe it's more about building a more direct relationship with one buyer, having a really proper branding and good food safety standards, but it might not be about certification. Certification is really thorough. It'll go in your whole supply chain. Audits can take time. It's a lot of processes you have to take in place. So there's definitely a need for a first analysis. We have staff on the ground that normally it's the first step they'll do is, question, okay, how much do you actually sell, or what's the volumes, what's the revenue, does it make sense? And then are you certifying or selling something that there's an interest for? If there's not already a market for that product, certification is not going to create the market. What it will create is a better condition of that market. So if no one in Canada is buying product X, like the fact that it's fair trade, it's not going to suddenly make people wanting to buy that product. But if it can definitely open doors, it can definitely help compete. But yeah, I think there's this first was always a bigger challenge. The other side is also the challenge we've seen sometimes is it depends on where you start. So
Yeah,
some
I
of
mean, my
the
answer is super
environmental
similar to Julie's, I guess.
criteria, for
A few
example.
points to add
If
is if
people
you're
use tons of
on the
pesticide and
producer
have
side,
no
if you're a
control
small
over what
holder,
they
you do
do,
have the
or
option to do a
have
group
never done
certificate,
training with their
which can
farmers
often
on this,
provide you
then
the
this might
resource
be
of
the
the
biggest
certificate
challenge for
manager
them,
to
and
help with
understanding
questions upon being
how to do
certified.
proper management of pesticides. So
I
it really
guess I'd
depends
also
on
mention
where
on the producer
where
side,
they're starting
our
from.
standard focuses on what we
For
call
certain ones,
continuous
it's quite
improvement,
easy
so
and
you're not
it's
expected to
straightforward, and
meet
others it
100%
can
of
be
the
quite
standard
complex.
that first year. We understand that's very difficult, and we don't want to exclude people. but there is the expectation to show improvement each subsequent year because we do visit the farm annually. And then if we jump to post-certification and the audit's been passed in terms of market access, the Rainforest Alliance tries to offer resources there, but a lot of that is going to be up to who's negotiating at the farm level. We don't assist in the negotiations themselves.
Yeah.
Our job really, going back to my team, is to drum up interest from large-scale buyers. And if they've made a commitment at a commodity or a country level, then we can introduce them to folks in our supply chain that meet that need. So a good example might be if Walmart, and this is completely fictional, but if Walmart had stated interest in avocados in Mexico specifically, then we can provide them with a list of all of our certified producers in that region as a way to help facilitate trade. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you for those responses. And Jake, I'm just going to continue on with you because you touched on a question that I had here for you. And that is, you know, you were an auditor in the past, and I wanted just to continue, you know, with the first year. What are some of the pitfalls producers, farmers, etc. encounter within the first year of getting their products to the certification level
So you're talking about
Rainforest?
producers?
Sorry, so farmers. Sometimes I call them
Yeah, right.
producers.
Yep. Yeah. Well, gosh, it really, as Julie had mentioned, it really can vary from farm to farm, and even country to country, depending on what the biggest social issues are in each region. I would say, if I could give you one item, most farms are going to need to make some type of financial investment in the farm to pass certification. It could be something very simple as putting new signage up if they are really close to passing an audit. It could be more involved and include modifications to a wet mill for a coffee farm or purchasing protective equipment for farm workers. So there's a varying scale of what the investment could be. Sometimes there's funding available to help with that, and we also try to let the producer know, and while it might be difficult, if they can think big picture. Certainly there's investments in year one, but the hope is that through certification there can be a reduction in cost and an increase in yield in subsequent years where you can recoup that initial investment. We're very aware that producers are often living week to week, year to year, and it's hard to be that forward thinking with financial investment. But if at all possible, we think that by participating in certification, you can help recoup that many times over through the length of a certificate. So I'd say that's definitely an obstacle we're aware of, and one that we always try to work on. But again, it can really vary from farm to farm, commodity to commodity, or depending on what part of the world we're working in.
I'm liking that these answers are short because there are a lot of questions within um, there seems to be questions coming up in the box already. So I think this question is for Julian. I think you have touched a bit on it. Over the past 5 to 10 years, we have seen the rise in consumer demand for ethically sourced and sustainable sourced goods. And in some instances, you see that as the prime mark. I say mark, but you see that as what is advertised in some of the grocery stores. And I'm wondering if this trend has any impact on the fair trade movement, or is it still just another name for fair trade, and how you see that impacting the name fair trade, because fair trade as a movement within that is ethically sourced and sustainably sourced goods. But now that in the past you used to say fair trade, but now you're seeing ethically sourced, sustainable source. And even in the case of fish, I noticed that in some of the larger retail stores, you see they actually have it over their the I call it the fish section of the store. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a sort of proliferation of different certifications, but beyond that, there's also just a lot of there's a part that's greenwashing, or just people saying, okay, I'm going to call it, I'm not certified anything, and no third party, no one actually checked anything, but I'm going to say that I did things good. I kind of say it would be like if you had written your own driver's license, like you say, yeah, I'm a good driver, I trust myself. So that's what we try to educate consumers also about, is to understand what is behind a statement like this. We see more brands coming up with their label saying that it's responsibly sourced or responsibly grown, or that they've paid a fair price. But if it hasn't been looked at or audited, we also know from some consumer survey, not from us, from a much larger consumer research company in Canada looking at sustainable purchasing, and something like, I think it's 86% of Canadians don't trust what brands say about themselves. So if brand, so that's why a lot of people look for third-party certifications like Rainforest or Fair Trade or Organic, because they trust that it's not the brand saying so, it's someone else that actually checked, and that's true. So that definitely helps. What is good, though, is that that all comes from the fact that there's a huge demand for it. So it actually grows the demand for fair trade. We've seen not just the numbers of sales grow tremendously, but a few things have started to happen over the last 2 years where companies call us because the retailer asked them to become fair trade, for example. And so where it isn't necessarily us anymore knocking all the doors and saying, hey, like, have you looked at that option, but supermarkets themselves asking the people who will make their chocolate chip cookies, or the people who will be making their tea boxes or whatever, to ask, hey, I care about what's in your supply chain, I care about the context in which it's done, and I want a credible certification attached to that. And I think I touched on it earlier, but what we're starting to see is, in Canada at least 10 years ago, if you wanted to buy even fair trade coffee, which is probably the most known commodity as ethically certified, if you were searching for fair trade coffee, you would have to go, in a really remote shop. It was not easy to find, and it would probably be quite expensive, and it might not even taste that great because it was just a couple of roasters that were doing that. By now, you can find it in, I would say, almost any retailer across the country.
And this one,
And you would
just looking to the
we
future,
have over, like, we work with over 130 different brands, and then that they provide also
there are a
multiple more
number
brands
of
themselves. So
innovation and
it's become a lot more
technological
mainstream.
advancement in all
It's
sectors.
still small in
We have
percentage
use
to
of
the overall
algorithms,
sales in the
artificial
market, but
intelligence, virtual reality,
growing.
to name a few. So how do you see these advancements affecting changing certifying of goods and services, or affecting the supply chain in itself, leading up to certification? The supply chain itself, sorry.
The three of us spoke about this, I guess, just yesterday, but
Yeah.
to share with the group, one area that I see, so retail is moving online for everything, whether it's a TV, people are buying cars online, and that's shifting to food. I mean, Amazon just acquired Whole Foods, right? So things are shifting online. Walmart has a big online presence, Costco, etc. So a big issue moving forward that's been brought to me by retailers is, how do you find a certified product online? If you're in the aisle at Kroger and you're shopping for coffee and you're holding up 1-pound bags of coffee, you can very easily see that it's got a fair trade sticker or a Rainforest Alliance certified sticker, and perhaps some additional messaging. If you're on your computer browsing on Amazon, perhaps that information's really not clear. The image doesn't include the logo, or it's just not very visible. Perhaps it's not in the description. So how do we address that? How can we make a clear link to the certified status of a product in an online retail environment? And from a tech side, it's pretty tricky. Many retailers are using different operating systems, etc. So I don't have an answer to it. But I think as we move forward each year, more and more food, perhaps not fresh, but certainly processed coffee, cocoa, tea, will be bought online. So how do we help educate consumers as to where they can find it, confirm its certified status, complete the traceability there, the transparency, the credibility? If it says it's certified online, can we be confident that it is? So I think that's a big topic that we'll need to address in the next, probably 3 to 5 years, truthfully.
Okay, thanks. Julie?
Yeah, I would say there's a big push also for a lot of transparency along the chain, which isn't necessarily pushed because of the technology, but it's made easier by the technology. So transparency to a level that in business no one is used to. Transparency on contracts, who are your suppliers. In simple food supply chains it's easier, but sometimes it might be, okay, fine, you're making, I don't know, you're producing jams, and come back to that example, like people will want to know not just that you made the jam, but where did you get your sugar, and where did that come from, and where did you get your fruits, and where did you get the pectin, and where did you get, so it's understanding your own supply chain as an exporter, like who are you actually buying from, and then kind of break that down even further, like if you're buying this, does it have subparts, where did the jar even come from, and like, so I think it's understanding a lot more and opening up about that information to whoever is buying from you. Transparency around pricing too. It's much easier for us to talk to consumers about the fact that some of those certified goods are sometimes more expensive, and we hope that they bring a fairer price to exporters and to producers. But it's much easier to explain that and to legitimize a higher price to a final buyer when they understand the breakdown of the pricing structure. It's like, well, if we want to make sure that the farmers make a living income and that the exporter covers their costs, and it isn't just someone becoming rich out of that. So I think it's explaining that and being a lot more open to being transparent.
Okay,
there's going to be more and more retailers or importers asking for what we call like social contracts, so almost like blockchain type of contracts where you can trace the full volumes of something down the supply chain.
We have quite a few.
So yeah, there's going to be a lot of need to be open to offer that insight into your own operations, which can be tricky in some cases, but can also be very empowering for the first few ones that will say, hey, I'll be super transparent and jump in.
Can everybody hear me? So the first question we have is from Anthony, who's in San Lucia with TIPA. He says, what food safety standards do they have to meet for the products to meet the requirements, so the producers? Yes,
yeah.
For certification.
On food safety, yeah, I would say actually TFO is probably a better place to answer this than me, because this would be a fair trade, I don't know for rainforest, but fair trade doesn't have a specific food safety standards for us. It's normally whatever the country requires. So it's more looking at what does Canada require as a food safety.
Yeah, we're just like fair trade regarding safety requirements for our auditing is more focused on
anyway,
producer
and will have to be
safety,
applied by
protective
whatever
equipment,
port authority or
application
customs of the
of
country.
fertilizer,
So I don't have a fair trade
safety
specific answer
components
to
really
that. It's
focused on
whatever
the
Canada
worker, so
would
it's more of a
require.
social component. And then just like Julie said, we're leaving the food safety requirements up to the country of origin, or destination rather, excuse me.
So Anthony, basically they're talking both saying like, yes, it comes down to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So they set up the food safety standards for Canada, and then both Rainforest and Fair Trade follow those food safety standards. So Anthony, so the question was, what assistance do you provide for a company to become Fair Trade certified? So do you have grants or other kinds of money that a company in St. Lucia or anywhere around the world can access in order to help them become Fair Trade certified?
So there's two types of assistance. One is human assistance, if you want. So we have field staff across the world that help. I don't think right now there's anyone based in St. Lucia. There's someone I think based in Jamaica that covers the Caribbean and sometimes travels around. So it can be someone in the region that helps, gets on a bunch of different calls with you, walks you through it, understand what, how far would normally do a first some sort of a gap assessment with you, or looking at the fair trade standards and how far you are from it, or would you meet them already? And once there's a decision that yes, we are ready for an audit, then there's a first application system with Flowcert directly, and then the auditor comes, and it's a first to, depending on how big the operation is, the audit can last anywhere between a day to 3 days if it's a really large operation. In terms of financial assistance, we have some funds that to help, especially the first year of certification. We try to really, in the past it used to be a lot more open where people could just apply and get that, but we didn't want it to create a sense of reaching a certification where it wouldn't be sustainable over the longer term in terms of the cost. So we normally do a first cost benefits analysis with the organization and say, okay, how much are you, for example, already exporting to Canada? We think there is a demand for that as fair trade. You could be selling, let's say, would it be 10% of your crop or your production as fair trade, or 15 or 20 or 50?
Sure, yeah. So
the increase in income
for us, it's much
would be,
more similar
does it
to
make
Julie's
sense for you
first
to
point.
pay for the certification?
Assistance is more human assistance.
And if there's a
Jake,
demand, and especially
baseline
in our case in
assessments
Canada,
for
if
crop
there's a
that
Canadian
they'll pass the
buyer
audit the
who's
first
definitely
time around,
interested
we
in
do an
buying,
assessment to let
then
them
we
know
normally
which
try to
areas
help
seem
cover the
to
cost
be the
initially
highest
the
risk
first
and
year
the
where
most
it's out of
work.
pocket, so that you
So
can
the goal is that
be
a
in
farm won't actually have their
first
first
year
audit until
if
they have
there's
some
a
confidence that
financial
they'll pass
need
it
initially.
to save money that way, because certainly you don't want to pay for it twice. And then, yeah, lots of field trainings in different countries of high priority. So, I guess a good example is we are setting something up for pineapple growers in Mexico next month who are interested in certification but confused about the process and just want some face-to-face meetings to go, similar to this event but in person. So we host things like that. Financial funding, Rainforest Alliance doesn't have financial funding that we provide directly, but we do try to work with farmers and producers to find funding through local governments, nonprofit organizations, etc. So we do have a team that can assist with that. The funding itself would not be coming from Rainforest Alliance. Thank you.
Okay. The other question we have here is, where markets are in place for products, specifically fruits, how can fair trade certification be achieved? Right, they're already exporting, yeah.
Yeah, so if someone is already, if I understand that correctly, it would be a case where someone is already selling fruit, for example. Right, exactly. So in those cases, the certification is achieved, the simple answer to that is by getting an audit and getting your certificate and applying. So it could be, if there's first you reach out, it could be, I can facilitate it as I'm in this call, but I would basically put you in touch with our field person in the region where you are. And then if there's any need for assistance, or they would send you the first checklist of what an auditor would actually look at. Then you normally have to prepare some documents on the company or the export company or the producers. It depends on where you are in the chain. Both parts have to be certified before, if it's, for example, if it's a co-op that exports by themselves, or if it's a plantation that exports by themselves, then it's just one operation. And it's just one certification. But if there is, let's say, a plantation or a co-op and then an exporter, then both have to be certified. So both have to be going through the process. Yeah, and we typically in this case also then look at, okay, who are you currently selling to now? And would they have interest in, or who's your importer if you're not selling to a final retailer? It's actually much easier to start with those cases, because it's on the other way around as well. When we get demands from supermarkets, for example, or we work with Costco and we're interested in having product X as fair trade, and typically they want to mitigate their risk, so they don't want to be importing all of their fair trade avocado from one co-op, because if something happens in that region, then they're stuck with no fair trade avocado. So they typically want 2 or 3 regions where they can be importing the same goods. And the first thing we do is normally look at, okay, well, who are you currently importing from, and then see if there's a possibility to work within that supply chain. So it's actually, much easier, and we work with all sorts of fruits. So if there's already a market for it, then Yeah, I would say the first is to have a connection on the ground if there's interest, and we could see also, depending on what kind of fruit it is, we can help you gauge how much market interest it might have, and we can try to promote it. We kind of do a little.
And we have another question here.
But we start
Are there
so we don't
some interest
certify
in people that are currently
a
already
product,
exporting, I don't know,
certify an
dragon
ingredient.
fruit. Would there be interest in that as
So
fair
I'm not a
trade?
hot
And we try to
sauce
have a
expert,
sense
but I'm
of
guessing
whether
tomatoes,
we get
garlic,
interest or not, and pass
peppers,
it back to the
etc.
producers.
So let's say you're a company that makes hot sauce
Right.
and you care about the environment and social causes and you want your product to be certified. What you would do, I would assume for both of us, Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance, but for Rainforest Alliance, you'd reach out to us and list your key ingredients that you would like to source as certified. And then we would look into our supply chain to let you know if there's something available. If it's certified at the farm level, then we'd let you know who's selling it. If it's not certified at all, perhaps we can talk with your supply chain to bring them onto a certification program. But for any product, whether it's hot sauce or chocolate chip cookies, we start with the ingredient list and highlight what is the priority for certification, and then look to see if we have something available currently.
Yeah, and also too, I would just add to that, and I think that might be similar for rainforest. There's two options, at least for us, there's two options in how you label in a final product. So the fair trade mark, which you've seen through my presentation, would normally be put in a product if everything that can be fair trade in it is fair trade. So if for example, we don't have fair trade vinegar, then if you're using vinegar in the hot sauce, then you can buy whatever vinegar you want because that's not available as fair trade. But there needs to be a minimum component of ingredients in it that are fair trade certified for the bottle to carry the mark. Now, what we are also working with is what we call fair trade sourced ingredients. So it's a slightly different mark, and it would highlight exactly what fair trade ingredient you're referring to. So if, let's say, just the tomatoes were fair trade, then it could be a different mark that says fair trade tomatoes, so that it's clear for the buyer that we're not talking about your spices or hot peppers in it, but just the tomatoes. Or it could be, just the hot peppers. I'm guessing if there's a question on hot sauce, probably the ingredients are bought locally. I don't know if that's the case. If that is, then it might not be that you want to be importing some, from Sri Lanka if you're based in the Caribbean or vice versa. So in those cases, it's more like opening a discussion with who you're buying from of, hey, would they be interested in becoming fair trade certified? And you building a partnership to say, well, if you become fair trade certified for your hot peppers, I'll buy them as fair trade and put them in my hot sauce and have that. So it's yeah, exactly. So the ingredients are locally grown. Yeah. So it would be working with the producers you're buying from.
Well, I'd say just reach out to me directly, and then I can best facilitate you the proper person to be. Gosh, let me
importing from a few other
pull
local
up our farm
places
list right now. I'm not sure.
At least you could start with one ingredient.
What is there a specific commodity of interest? I'm trying to look and see if it's in the chat box.
No, they didn't mention yet. But Anthony, and for all participants, we will share.
You can also access on our website. We have a complete certificate database, so you can search by crop or country, or you can just print out an entire farm list, which is very long. But if you're interested in, coffee, Jamaica, you can search by either of those functions to see if we have anything existing. So certainly do that, but feel free to put anyone in touch with me directly, and I'm happy to facilitate that.
Perfect. I'm just wondering if there's any other questions, because I don't see. Oh, Claire's, you have a question.
There is one talk about banana chips.
So you can move it. That's the one. I was just about to talk.
There was a question, I think, earlier on banana chips. If I'm going up in the Chad, there's something about, what are the steps to be taken if a banana chips company wishing to sell their products in Canada, especially the financial implications and paperwork involved? Yeah, I mean, there's a portion that would be, I think, TFO, like to explain the paperwork involved to sell into
So
Canada.
I see.
Now, if it's to make it fair trade certified, then the same question is for the same response is for the hot sauce. If it is to be fair trade or Rainforest Alliance certified, then the bananas in it have to be coming from a farm that's certified. Yeah, so we work in Madagascar a lot with vanilla farmers. So and I think we have a field staff in Madagascar. I could put people in touch with them, or at least with the Fair Trade Africa and Middle East team that manages Madagascar. Yeah, so in this case, then the bananas would have to come from a farm that is fair trade certified. If the chips bag wants to have and then if it's not the same company, then the company making the chips would have to also be certified so that we check that they bought the fair trade bananas on fair trade terms, and then we would license the use of the logo to put on the bag, so you could use the fair trade mark on the bag of chips. We've done this in Jamaica, for example. There's producers in Jamaica. I think there's some producers in St. Vincent and the Caribbean and quite a few in the DR and Dominican Republic that have done that and export either fair trade banana chips or fair trade banana like
well, thank you very much for the time.
For
I'm glad that we had all these
for,
questions.
Baking or cooking.
Oh, I think that one's for you, luckily for Julie and I. And please do share my contact info with folks, and don't be shy to reach out if you've got country-specific questions. I'm happy to help. And I did look at the Caribbean. We've got certificates in Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica right now, so it's a region we work in, but certainly I would say developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What country is Paul? Sorry, what country is Paul based in? Saint Lucia. Yeah, I would say for GAP, there's many people within Saint Lucia that know how to manage GAP. So that's, many auditors and local people that can at least give you support to get there. The ISOs, I'm sure there's also local people, or if not in Barbados, but that can help. Yeah, that can definitely help with those. BRC and SQF, so I suppose you're in fruits or managing transformation of fruits or fresh to something else. But yeah, those are all things that we try to also support fair trade farmers, sometimes understanding who can give the support and to understand what they really need, because sometimes buyers ask for a whole series of certification, which might be more than they really need. So to get proper advice on what you really need, and get one, if there's multiple choices, don't just go for the cheaper one. Sometimes go for the one that might be recognized in many markets if you have a hope of exporting in multiple markets, because some might be recognized in Canada, not in the US, or in Europe and not elsewhere. So it might be good to go for one that is the most widely recognized.
We will also provide their contact information so that you can reach out to them yourselves. So to everyone, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Great
guys.
question.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.